In My Hero Academia Season 7, we've been going through the entire story of the war arc, with us already covering everything from Shigaraki's battle against America's #1 hero to the Event of the Traitor arc and even beyond. And most recently, we discussed the battle between Ochako and Himiko Toga, so go and check that out if you aren't caught up with the story. However, before we get into the second round of Endeavor's faithful battle with the Dark Overlord All For One, I want to ask you to please like the video if you enjoy it, or it at least serves as some nice background noise while you study or get some work done. And of course, please hit that subscribe button on the channel as well as notifications, since as Demon Slayer and My Hero seasons get closer, I'll be uploading longer videos more regularly, and you wouldn't want to miss any of those. Lastly, I'd feel bad if I didn't ask you to follow me on Twitter at Vocal Pineapple, since a lot of people tell me that I'm way different than how they expected based on my videos, and I like the idea of you guys getting to know me better. With all that said, I've got an action-packed video ready for you guys today, so let's discuss the moments after Endeavor burned All For One to a crisp after that intro. Hit it! On the Gunga Mountain battlefield, on the heels of Todoroki's victory against his brother Dabi, we saw as Endeavor risked his life and limb to reach All For One in time for a devastating attack, meant to save Hawks, Jiro, and Tokoyami, who the mastermind was looking to kill with his next attack. But ultimately, Endeavor's goal with this final attack was to end this side of the war all at once, as in this moment he used every bit of firepower he thought that he had left. And when the smoke clears, he sees All For One's body floating in the air, beginning to fall towards the ground, as Endeavor thinks to himself that he's actually done it, since according to their intel, All For One doesn't actually have any of the same regeneration quirks that Shigaraki has, something that likely happened as a result of All For One realizing that it would be more beneficial for Shigaraki himself to pretty much have all of the healing quirks placed into his body, because the villain had a trick left to play up his sleeves that it was now time for the heroes to witness. As Endeavor lets his guard down for a moment to take a breather, knowing that he can rest easy, Hawk screams his name to warn him that things aren't over yet, as Endeavor slowly lifts his barely held up head to look up towards All For One, whose body has stopped falling towards the ground and now floats completely charred and burned beyond repair in front of them. As the Demon Lord begins to speak and Endeavor realizes that this fight is long from over, All For One says, "Do you really believe that I would step onto this stage without an ace up my sleeve? You should know by now this body is well past its expiration date. I no longer have any use for it, but that's why there's something I'd like to try. An experiment, if you will." Sparks of energy begin to emanate from All For One's body, tearing across his charred flesh, as in his head he thinks of exactly where he got this power, as All For One sees a vision of Eri and one of Overhaul's quirk erasing bullets, and it's revealed that he's not only stolen a version of her quirk for himself, but now in this moment against the #1 hero where everyone is already exhausted, All For One begins to heal all the way back to his prime body he had when he fought against All Might, using Eri's rewind with a massive smile on his face. As the Demon Lord laughs at Endeavor and the others, we see his eyes and his ears begin to heal back first, as All For One's rewind energy creates flesh and skin all over his body, and he tells the heroes that they were wrong for thinking that the heroes were the only ones prepared to risk their lives, as this very risky play by All For One seems to work out in his favor, but soon we'll explain the major problem with this tactic. So when All For One begins rewinding, we cut to Deku for a moment as he's flying back to Shigaraki's area to try and help out Bakugo and the others who are all being torn apart as we speak. Yoichi, the First One For All user, appears behind Deku in a cloud of vestige smoke, telling him that something is wrong and he has a really bad feeling about this war. However, it's at that moment that Deku was approached by Star and Stripes' squad of pilots as they offered Deku a faster way to get back to UA. Now, before we cut back to Gunga Mountain Villa, we see a flashback of All For One's first act after breaking out of prison, which was to go to a secret underground base that he shared with the Doctor, and despite the fact that by this point the Doctor was already arrested during the events of Season 6's War Arc, we hear an audio recording that he leaves behind for All For One that explains to him that as soon as Shigaraki retrieved the quirk erasing bullets, the Doctor started to work on trying to figure out how they were made and more importantly how they work, and during that process he discovered two things. The first being that, like we the audience know, the effects of the bullets stem from someone's quirk, which is really fascinating to the Doctor, but more interestingly, he also discovered that the effect of the quirk itself was to reverse causality, which more or less means that Eri's quirk can target any specific aspect aspect of something and reverse it, and a good example would be on a person. Let's say Eri mastered her quirk and used it on a human being. In that case, she would be able to do many different things. For example, she'd be able to rewind a person's age until they were literally rewinded out of existence. But if she decided to, instead of rewinding their actual age, she could rewind their DNA to turn that human being into a monkey, or any other stage of our evolutionary process. In a similar manner, her quirk is able to rewind specifically the quirk factor of a human being, but it would probably take a whole different video to explain how weird things get when you consider that Eri can rewind her rewinds, which essentially enables her to fast forward targets as well. This is a truly horrifying quirk that suddenly mutated in this girl, and Dr. Garaki notes this as he tells All For One that during his studies he practically only focused on the quirk itself and reproducing its effects, and while he was definitely able to, as he created a version of the quirk that All For One could take, it comes with the caveat of being something that can only be done once, since once All For One activates Eri's quirk, it will never deactivate. Perhaps if the doctor was given more time and years of study to figure out a perfected version, then the evil lord would have never had to stoop to such a desperate strategy. But as All For One puts on his new mask and hears the doctor's final goodbyes, we cut back to the present where we see All For One in all of his glory, finally showing his face in our story as all of his injuries rewind themselves, and the first thing on his mind is giving Endeavor praise for actually pushing him this far. All For One falls out of the sky down towards the battlefield where many heroes are fighting against Nomu and villains in all-out wars. However, as he comments that his body feels as light as a feather, he speed blitzes through a group of 4 heroes and takes an article of clothing from each of them as he grabs a woman by the neck and steals her quirk as well. Hawk sweeps in and saves her from All For One before he's actually able to kill her, and the villain stands there looking sort of sad for a moment as he says that now that he's used this trump card, he'll eventually disappear and die, but like a baton, his dream has been passed on to Shigaraki. So right now, he wants the heroes to allow him to fulfill the last remaining task of a dying king, which is to rescue the Dark Prince from the trap the heroes have sprung on them. Hawks tries to buy time for Endeavor to heal by asking All For One questions about One For All, as All For One explains that all he's ever wanted was to obstruct the future of the world and become the enemy of progress, because only through that action can he ever truly be considered humanity's greatest villain. Now, over in America, we see that the situation has gotten really grim as people hide in shelters much like in Japan, and villains run wild in the streets because America seems to have faced the same problem that Japan did, with All For One's lackeys coming out and destabilizing society, likely by doing their own prison breaks of quirk-powered individuals that basically made it unsafe to come outside or even stay in your homes during this period. We can see signs that say "We are All For One" not too far from the White House, as inside, the president explains to Timothy Agpar that America is going to abandon Japan completely and side with All For One when this war is over. And it's gotten to the point where American intelligence is stating that every country around the world is preparing to do the same, so the president wants to be the first to do this, since they might have already incurred his wrath due to Star and Stripes' attack on Shigaraki and their use of nukes near the ocean of Japan to try and put him down. Every nation scrambles to gain Shigaraki's trust, but Agpar argues that this is the time to stand strong, because if not, when the dust settles, even if they try to bow their heads, they'll be robbed of everything they have. However, as this discussion rages on, a lot of things happen all at once at the Gunga Mountain battlefield, as we've previously explained that things reach a point where the battlefield is swarmed with Twice clones, as Dabi arrives to take care of his father Endeavor, and Ochako and Toga do battle amidst a horde of Twices that are completely storming the entire battlefield. With all of this going on, this more or less leaves All For One completely free to fly towards Shigaraki's area. However, making him his priority, we see as Hawks with his remaining feathers tries to keep up with the Demon King, who thinks to himself that he just needs to reach Shigaraki and force his own All For One quirk onto him for him to take over Shigaraki's body and completely lock away the Tenko Shimura personality forever. Hawk screams that this war is the story of how the heroes came out on top, so he'll never let All For One get away. But as Tokoyami spots his teacher in the distance as Hawk sends a high-speed slash towards All For One with his vibrating sword, we see All For One narrowly dodge this before letting loose a quirk on Hawks that completely scatters his body across the sky, as red feathers and blood litter the forest outside of the Gunga Mountain Villa, and Hawks, the number 2 hero, dies. Seeing what happened to his teacher, Tokoyami screams as tears fill his eyes and a rage begins to fill the deepest parts of his stomach. However, before he snaps and loses control, suddenly Hawks' red feathers that were floating in the air around his body begin to turn into red roses, as his blood itself turn into petals, and in the air in front of All For One and Tokoyami, a shoujo manga version of Hawks' head floats still, completely shocking everyone and causing this amazing reaction from Tokoyami, as it's revealed that not only was the Hawks that All For One destroyed an illusion, but that illusion came at the hands of Shiketsu High's #1 airhead, Camie, as the Shiketsu students arrive on the battlefield and All For One has an entire new threat to try and handle. You see, in our last part about this battlefield, we discussed how Jiro and Tokoyami actually managed to give All For One a little trouble. However, now with him in his prime form, obviously it's going to take a little more than just these two first-year UA students to stand up against someone that fought All Might. Thankfully for the heroes, the students over at Shiketsu actually have some pretty broken abilities, with Camie's illusions being so realistic that even All For One can't see through them. But more importantly, coming in like a raging hurricane, we see Inasa finally making his appearance in this final arc as he summons giant whiplashes of wind that scoop up nearly all of the Twice clones in the area, while his friend Meatball uses his quirk to turn the Twices into useless lumps of meat that can't do anything, as this trio sets their eyes on All For One. On the battlefield, every hero who is fighting against Twice clones, as well as every Shiketsu student who is now on the battlefield, target their long-range attacks towards All For One all at once. But the evil lord more or less dodges everything really easily, except for a few attacks that he has to use a Twice clone as a human shield for. All For One puts a really big smile on his face as he realizes that the heroes are now willing to risk it all to bring an end to this battle and keep him from leaving the Gunga Mountain Villa. So he spreads his arms apart and summons a massive ball of energy with crackling lightning all around it, setting many of the heroes flying and injuring plenty of others, but still waves and waves of heroes stay strong and fire their attacks at All For One, who was busy describing why they should all be so afraid of him. At this time, we see him actually get swept up in one of Inasa's attacks, as All For One is really put in a dangerous situation, since inside of the wind cage that Inasa has created for him, there are plenty of projectiles and, more importantly, parts of Meatball's quirk that would instantly defeat All For One if he touched even a single one. The villain thinks to himself that this is actually a really smart tactic, as he plans on stealing Inasa's quirk and leaving, which leads to him causing a massive energy explosion with him at the center, as a bolt of lightning from his attack even flies into the Shiketsu student's face, blasting off his hat and part of his head, but nothing can stop Inasa from pushing himself to his absolute limit, as Hawks notes that One For All isn't the only thing that links people's hearts together, and that maybe Endeavor and all of the other heroes have forged their own fair share of links that together could actually gain them victory on this day, as All For One looks down at Hawks and sees the light of hope still in his eyes and thinks to himself that they still aren't taking him seriously. But it's at this moment where things finally start to get serious, as suddenly, while floating in the air, All For One feels an extremely dangerous presence behind him, as we see a massive version of Dark Shadow lingering behind the Demon King, and Tokoyami looking down on All For One, telling him that nobody ever crowned him the King of Shadows, so he'll be taking all of All For One's darkness to use it for himself and claim that title for the heroes, as Dark Shadow continues to grow and stands up, destroying a massive section of the forest around him, thanks to the dark clouds and the lack of Dabi's flames currently present due to the storm that has rolled in over the course of this battle. Tokoyami then reveals to All For One a secret strategy that the heroes had this whole time, which was based on a statement by All Might a long time ago, where the hero said that All For One has to make physical contact with a quirk user to steal their quirk, because it's not like he could just touch Endeavor's fire and steal it that way, which gave rise to the idea that Tokoyami himself might be an excellent counter, or at least capable of helping Hawks and Endeavor in this fight, since All For One can't steal his quirk just by touching Dark Shadow. So in this moment, with All For One actually scared for the first time in a long time, we see Inasa use his quirk to pull All For One closer to giant Dark Shadow's massive punch, as the creature slams down on All For One with a devastating impact. As Tokoyami forces his hand down onto All For One, trying to crush him or at least do as much damage as he could, Hawks informs him that he's invincible right now, but he's on a timer, so they need to keep the pressure up as much as possible, as they all start creating plans about what they're about to do. But all those plans fall apart when another massive bright explosion erupts right next to Dark Shadow, completely bathing him in his only weakness, as All For One emerges from out beneath his fist, looking noticeably younger than he was before taking Tokoyami's punches, showing just how much damage they did, as All For One's rewind needed to speed up and use a large amount of its remaining energy just to keep him alive. Now, while this may be a momentary win for the heroes, with Dark Shadow at least out of the picture for now, this leaves a now younger and even more powerful version of All For One to start rampaging across the battlefield, as at full speed he not only tried to fly away, but also unleashed a storm of lightning across the entire landscape to take out any heroes that he flew past. At that time, something would happen that would cause both sides to think this is perfect timing, as off in the distance, while Hawks, Tokoyami, and Inasa are all chasing All For One through the skies, the Demon Lord spots Gigantomachia, as he sighs a sigh of relief, knowing that his pet giant can now handle the rest of these heroes and finally give him the break that he needs. So imagine All For One's confusion when he watches Gigantomachia grab an entire mountain and throw it directly at him at full force, an attack which he barely manages to avoid by destroying the mountain using one of his quirks, as he uses another one to zoom in on Gigantomachia as he spots Kirishima, Shino, and Mina on top of Machia's head and truly starts to wonder just what the hell is going on in this final battle. Machia sends another mountaintop his way as All For One sends an attack towards the heroes on his head to knock some sense into the beast and free him from Shinto's control. But we actually find out that Machia isn't being controlled here, as he feels betrayed by All For One abandoning him and clearly using him for all these years without any intention of ever coming back for him. Something which broke Machia's heart because he's always been the most loyal to All For One and never once disobeyed him or his orders. Now this of course means that there's no way for All For One to stop Machia's attacks against him right now because the beast actually wants to take him down. And as Mount Lady finally rejoins the battle using a massive rocket warhammer, Dark Shadow has finally completely reformed as he along with the other two kaijus all smash down attacks on All For One at once, trapping the villain again under their blows. All over the world, people watch live streams of the different battles happening all across Japan. However, as the heroes and Machia continue to bash All For One into the earth, when Mount Lady's weapon breaks and she takes just a second to switch to another support item that Yui Kodai from Class 1B makes giant for her, All For One uses that moment to send two giant mouths out of the ground as one tears through her torso and sends her flying up into the air, shifting back into her normal size as she's completely knocked out or maybe even worse from the force of this blow. Things get worse as beneath Machia the earth starts to crumble and crack as it glows a bright purple and a stream of energy erupts from it, rushing straight up into the air like a giant rope of crackling energy that tears through Gigantomachia and sends him falling towards the ground, also completely out of commission. And it's at that point where we watch All For One, who had been beaten down to the bone, start to regenerate as he screams to Machia that he's a fool who deserves to die and thinks to himself that something dark is building up inside him because he can feel that the younger that he gets, the harder it is to control his homicidal urges. This causes All For One to create a ball of electricity in his hands that he fires off, causing his entire arm to blow away, but this orb of lightning makes direct contact with Dark Shadow and completely obliterates it with Hawks and Tokoyami inside, shredding the two heroes to pieces as they're flung towards the ground beneath them, barely still in one piece. Everyone looks on in horror as All For One explains that they never had a chance against him because he can draw out the full potential of every quirk he uses. But Inasa yells to the other heroes that it isn't too late and all they need to do is attack. But this is when everything goes black and it all goes quiet on the battlefield for a moment. As a strike of lightning flashes, we return to the Gunga Mountain battlefield and see a scene straight out of a horror book, with heroes impaled on spikes across the battlefield and blood literally everywhere. As Tokoyami lays on the ground completely knocked out, we watch as All For One holds Hawks by the neck, telling him that he pushed the Demon Lord too far. And now All For One is going to take Tokoyami's quirk and become truly unstoppable. But Hawks, who is barely conscious, stabs his sword through All For One's heart as All For One tells Hawks, enough, you've already tried your best. Even with your quirk in such a pitiful state, you managed to put up an amazing fight. I'm honestly impressed. As Hawks' sword starts to get pushed out of All For One's body thanks to the rewind healing, we see as All For One steals Hawks' quirk and grows a set of his very own wings, albeit still very small and unable to completely grow because of Ares' rewind. But as All For One thinks to himself that rewind is still speeding up in response to every injury that he takes, he feels something wet hit the back of his leg as he turns around making a face that screams, "Really?" And he spots Mineta laying on the floor, having just hit him with one of his great balls. And the boy tells him not to steal Tokoyami's quirk because it'll turn him into a complete edgelord. So instead, he should take Mineta's quirk and get the best hairstyle in the world. But really, Mineta says that he can take any quirk he wants, but please, don't take Dark Shadow away from Tokoyami, as he stares down All For One with his eyes full of rage for his friend and fear for himself. In this moment, All For One looks down towards the ground and sees his body continuing to rewind, and for a moment he remembers how Jiro's screams caused his quirks to act up, thinking that there may be some sort of latent danger in hearing the screams of the weak. So realizing that he doesn't have much time left, he throws Hawks to the side and flies straight up into the air, telling the heroes that the news cameras are there and they've been watching everything, and that at the end of the day, they weren't able to protect anything, which will lead to the entire world being disappointed in them, just as he'd planned. And from here, All For One flies away toward Shigaraki's area to begin the final battle of the series, as officially the battle at the Gunga Mountain Villa against All For One ends, and the winner is All For One. Now, in the aftermath, all of our heroes lay down as the cold rain falls on top of them. However, Hawks thinks to himself that there's still hope, no matter how desperate things may look, as he sits next to Tokoyami and places his hand on his student, happy that Tokoyami didn't meet the same fate as him and having his quirk taken. While elsewhere, we see All For One flying into the city that UA is currently floating the closest to, as he thinks to himself that he's really calling it close here with Ares Rewind, but below him, he spots All Might standing in the middle of the road, screaming towards the villain and saying, "I am here," as All For One's dark urges resurface again. And despite the fact that he's really desperate for time here, he can't stop himself from flying towards All Might and beginning an entirely new battle, as All Might's briefcase transforms around him and our hero All Might returns to the battlefield with a powered up suit that actually makes him a threat in this battle. But before we discuss their final fight, we need to discuss the mutant uprising in My Hero Academia and the fate of the one who might be the most important to the League of Villains' plans in this final battle, Kurogiri. Thanks for listening to this story, and as a reminder, this is part 8 in a long series of videos explaining everything that happened in My Hero Academia Season 7. We're almost finished now with just 3 parts left before we're finished, and the plan is to finish right before the season comes out, so next month you'll likely see 2 of these videos at some point, and that's all possible because of you, since at least one of those is going to be done by an editor thanks to the money made from your help. So please subscribe, hit that like button, or even share the video, and it'll make sure you get these videos a little quicker in the future. I appreciate you guys. Check out my new horror channel, Very Scary Pineapple, where we've already covered a few scary stories, and we even have shorts if you're not into long form content. But I've rambled long enough, so I'll see you later. It's Pineapple. Peace.